All right, welcome back to Biblical Theology today. And today we're going to start looking at one new story in light of a couple that we've already been looking at together. And so our title for today is An Ark, a Fish, and Jesus. We're going to look at the story of Noah and his ark, the story of Jonah and the really big fish, and then, of course, how all of this ties into the story of Jesus. And so, by way of a little bit of review, in an earlier video we looked at Matthew 14:22 through 33, which is the story of Jesus walking on water. And we connected that back to the story of Noah, and we saw that in Genesis it actually says that Noah's ark walked on water, and so there seems to be this connection between Jesus and the ark. Both of them are walking on water, and we came to the conclusion by the end of that video that Jesus is like Noah's ark, but he's even better because unlike Noah and the first ark, Jesus is able to actually help the drowning people all around him and pull them up into the place of salvation. Whenever Noah was in the ark, he couldn't reach down and get the unrighteous people out of the water and pull them up, but Jesus, walking on water, is able to approach Peter, who's drowning because he's an unfaithful person and a sinner, and he's able to take him by the hand and pull him up and save his life and bring him to salvation. And so we've seen a connection between the ark and Jesus. Today, though, we want to introduce a new story, which is the story of Jonah. It was only so long before we had to come to the story of Jonah. We're talking about Jesus and water, God's people coming to dangerous, deadly waters and somehow finding salvation. And of course, we have to talk about the story of Jonah here. In the story of Jonah, in the first 6 verses, we learn that God has told Jonah to go preach to the city of Nineveh, and Jonah has said no to God's command. In fact, he's decided to try to go several thousand miles in the opposite direction. He's hopped on a ship heading for Tarshish. And in Jonah 1, 7 through 16, he's on his boat, and a storm has come, and the sailors who are on the boat are freaking out, thinking that they're going to die, so they go and they wake Jonah up, and they start asking him some questions, and Jonah tells them, all of this storm is happening because I've rebelled against my God. My God made the dry land. My God made the sea. I've rebelled against him, and so he's bringing judgment on me. And they say, what should we do? And he says, hurl me overboard. And so they hurl him overboard, and all of a sudden we have Jonah in these really dangerous, deadly waters of the sea, and he's going underneath them, and he starts to look a lot like the unrighteous people in the days of Noah. And from other lessons, we could also say he starts to look a whole lot like the unrighteous Egyptians in the day of Moses. He's a sinner who is about to drown under the waters of God's righteous wrath. But in Jonah 1:17, we read, but the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And after we read this verse, after we finish Jonah 1, we can start doing a little bit of a side-by-side comparison between Jonah and Noah. And it might look something like this. We might see that both of them are really unrighteous people. Noah was called righteous. God said that he was righteous in all of his generation. But God also said about the people in the days of Noah that every thought of every man's heart was only wicked continually. And so what is he saying about Noah there? Well, Noah is righteous compared to the people around him, perhaps, but it doesn't change the fact that really deep down he's an unrighteous, sinful person just like everyone else. He's someone who needs God's mercy and needs God's forgiveness and grace, as the end of the story of Noah clearly shows us. Noah is not a good person. In fact, it says in Genesis chapter 6 that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And Noah's name is actually, if we took the word grace and flipped it around, that would be Noah's name. Noach and Hain, they're the opposite words in Hebrew. And so the picture there is that Noah is the opposite of favor. He deserves the opposite of grace, but God is being gracious to him anyways and is considering him a righteous person anyways. In the story of Jonah, I don't have to take time to convince you that Jonah was an unrighteous person. He's rebelling against God. He's trying to run away from God's presence. He's obviously in sin. And so in this way, they are alike. We could also say that Noah and Jonah are alike in another way, in that it's through them that God brings salvation. God is judging the entire world in the days of Noah. He's wiping out all of humanity, and the only people he's sparing are Noah and his family members. And this is the last remnant of mankind. It's going to be the job of Noah to start repopulating the earth. And if God lets Noah go, if he lets Noah die, then mankind is extinct. They go away. And so the hopes and dreams of mankind are riding on this guy who is in this ark. The hope of salvation for mankind is concealed within that ark. In the same way, Jonah is the man that God had appointed for the salvation of Nineveh. And God doesn't ever indicate throughout the story of Jonah that he has a backup plan or a plan B. He said, the way that I'm going to bring my message to Nineveh, and the way that I'm going to bring the hope of mercy to Nineveh, is through this rebellious prophet. And so the hopes and dreams and the salvation of Nineveh is concealed in this really humongous fish that has provided a safe place for Jonah in the middle of all of these deadly waters. More than that, though, it's not just the hopes and dreams and salvation of mankind, but it's the hopes and dreams and salvation of all creation. We remember in the story of Noah that it wasn't just human beings who were on the ark, but all of the animals got on the ark as well. All of the animals came onto the ark, and in that ark there was this microcosm of the entire world. God wasn't just saving humanity, but he was saving the entire creation through Noah and through that ark. And so there were cows and there were giraffes and there were elephants, and every animal that had been created was in that ark. And it was in that way that God was bringing salvation to the whole creation. And in the same way, in the story of Jonah, the very last phrase of that story is incredibly confusing. God is talking to Jonah and says, he's asking him, did you not really care about that plant that just died? And Jonah said, I cared so much about that plant that I could just die right now. I'm so upset. And God very gently says to him, well, you loved that plant, and in much of the same way, I love the people of Nineveh and didn't want them to perish. And I also knew that there was much cattle in that city. And that is a really weird way for the story to end. Why is God so concerned about the cows of Nineveh? And I think it's because God is, if God had Sodom and Gomorrah, Nineveh, it wouldn't just be the wicked people who had died. It would have been the rest of the creation and the rest of the life in those cities as well. And God shows in both of these stories that he cares about animals. He cares about the rest of creation, and he is finding a way to not just redeem humanity, but to redeem the whole entire created order. And that's a point that's being made in both of these stories. And so as Jonah is in the belly of that fish, the hopes and dreams and redemption of the entire cosmos, or the entire city of Nineveh, not just the people, but of the rest of creation there as well, all of their hopes and dreams and hope for salvation are in the belly of that fish as well. We also see in both of these stories that God provides a safe place during the flood. And the first one is the ark. He provides the ark during the flood. The second one in the story of Jonah is it says that God appointed a fish for Jonah. You think about the fish, and we typically think of it as a really bad thing in the story. For Jonah, it's a really good thing. Because if God doesn't provide this fish to swallow Jonah up, what happens to Jonah? He drowns. He dies. The one thing that is saving Noah, and then the one thing that is saving Jonah, is this place that God has made and prepared for them in the midst of all of the deadly, dangerous waters. There's some place that offers them safety from the storm and salvation. And so in both of these stories, we have that. Both of these stories also have a dove, and that can be a little bit difficult to see. We know in the story of Noah that Noah starts sending birds out from the ark to see if the land is dry, if the waters from the flood have receded. And we know that he sends out a dove. And the dove is going to tell him whether it's safe to come out of the ark or not. It's interesting as well that Jonah's name actually means dove in Hebrew. And so whenever this giant fish 3 days later decides to vomit him up onto the land, it's like the dove is being sent out of the ark. And the dove being sent out of the ark in the Noah story let humanity know that God had made the world safe again. They could come out, they could trust his mercy and trust his grace, and the flood wouldn't get them anymore. And whenever this second dove comes out of the belly of this fish, he's going to go to Nineveh, and eventually through that, God's going to bring his mercy and grace to the people of that city as well. And then in both of these stories, we see that there is success. Humanity survives the flood in Noah's story. Nineveh survives in the story of Jonah, but there's also massive failure. The stories of Noah and Jonah end on pretty sour notes. And so from beginning to end, these two stories mimic each other quite a bit. We're supposed to see Jonah as this new Noah. We're supposed to see the fish as this new ark. And we're supposed to read them in light of each other. And whenever we realize that, it starts to help us understand the story of Jesus a little bit better. We know that there's a relationship between the story of Jonah and the story of Jesus. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And in Matthew 12, Jesus says that he would give that generation the sign of Jonah. And the idea would be that Jesus would die and would spend 3 days in the belly of the earth before he was vomited out. The grave couldn't hold him anymore. He would be resurrected from the dead. And so we know that there's some similarities between these two stories. Another similarity would be that whenever Jonah was in the belly of the fish, he didn't die. But he does say that it's almost like he's gone down to the place of the dead, to Sheol. He says that in Jonah chapter 2. And whenever he's vomited up out of the fish's belly, it's kind of like he's been resurrected. He's almost died, and now he's back onto the dry land. He's back on in the world, right? And so there's some picture here of this resurrected prophet who then goes and starts preaching God's message to the people that God sent him to. And in the same way, in the story of Jesus, we actually do have a resurrected prophet. And what does Jesus do after his resurrection? Well, at least 3 times after he's resurrected, he goes to his disciples and he starts preaching through the entire Bible to them. He opens up and it says, starting with Moses and then the prophets and the Psalms, he starts explaining how all the scriptures bore witness to him. And so in both of these stories, we have this resurrected and preaching prophet. And then these last 2 points. In the story of Jonah, this resurrected and preaching prophet brings salvation to the city of Nineveh. And I messed up on this other slide. Jesus doesn't just bring salvation to Ninevites. He brings salvation to all people, Jews and Gentiles. He invites all of them into his kingdom. And more than that, Jonah also, he didn't just save the people of Nineveh. God also said he had saved the cattle of Nineveh. And that's important. That's a very important point in this story. He's this new Noah who hasn't just saved the people, but has saved the creation as well. Jesus as well hasn't just saved people, but he has purchased the redemption of creation. We hear in Revelation 21:4, Jesus say, "Behold, I make all things new." And we know that we're waiting for a new heaven and a new earth. And the picture that the Bible gives us of the new creation is not that God is going to blow up this present creation and then start from scratch and make a new one. The idea of new creation throughout the New Testament is always that God takes the old stuff and then renews it. So Jesus dies, and then he's resurrected, and he doesn't get this brand new body. The body that died and that was laid in the tomb is the same body that gets up again. And whenever we die, it's not that we get these brand new bodies that aren't related to the ones we have right now. Rather, God is going to resurrect this body, and then he's going to glorify it. It is going to be different. Like Jesus could walk through walls. He could kind of teleport sometimes. But it was the same body. They could recognize it. It still had the holes in the hands and the feet and in the side. He still ate fish. And so the body is the same. The created stuff is still the same. But God takes it, he renews it, and he makes it different somehow. He makes it glorious. And so the idea of the new creation is not this atomic bomb on the earth and then let's start again from scratch. Rather, it's taking what is created, taking how it is now, and then fixing it. It's not letting the curse win. It's reversing the curse, as we sing in one of our hymns, especially around Christmas time. And so, as far as the curse is found, it's going to be removed and reversed. And so, we have the idea throughout the New Testament that the salvation Jesus brings is actually cosmic. That's why we read in Romans 8 that the sons and children of God groan for our salvation to be revealed. But what else groans in that chapter? The creation groans as it waits for our salvation to be revealed. It's been in bondage. It's been under the curse. It's been broken. It's been suffering decay. But the entire creation is groaning and anticipating the day when Jesus will make all things new, the same way that he's made us new. And so, whenever we start reading the story of Jonah, and we read it in light of the story of Noah, I think it starts giving us a picture of the fullness of Jesus' work. It's not only that Jesus saves humanity. That would be good enough, and we would all say, that's awesome, amen. But Jesus is also concerned about all of the stuff that he and the Father and the Spirit created back in Genesis chapter 1. And he's not going to let sin have the last word. He's not going to let the curse have the last word. But in this incredible moment of grace and glory, he's going to claim all of that for himself and make it all new and all glorious. And so we look forward to that day. We long and we say, come, Lord Jesus Christ, come quickly, just as John of Patmos said, and we pray that it won't be long before we can stop groaning and the creation can stop groaning and we can be at perfect rest with our Jesus. We hope that this video was encouraging and that it helps you understand a bit better the totality of the salvation that Jesus has brought, and we look forward to sharing more content with you all soon. Thanks.